Fred Ricciani of TSC News. I'm joined today by a combat sports expert. He is the author, available now on Kindle, Amazon.com, the official fighter promoter playbook. He is Tony Shultz. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Fred?
Doing quite well. Now, mixed martial arts, boxing, on the surface, it seems somewhat easy to promote a fight if you have the right resources, although time and time again, for every one or two guys that do it quite well, you see a number of others that, well, they flop. What made you decide to not only tweet things out, not only Facebook things, not only write about it on the internet, but actually come out with a book that guys could use as their go-to guide to promote fights?
Main reason, a lot of fighters I know weren't getting quality fights, and the fights that they were getting, the promoters just weren't putting on good events. So I did it initially just as a way to fully understand the behind the scenes, the business, quote unquote, of boxing. And from there, I just realized that there's just so much information that's not available to anybody. It's really a who you know and kind of get lucky type of business. So I wanted to put a definitive guide together, a blueprint, if you would, of how to actually put together a combat sport event, not only from a fighter's perspective so that they can get quality fights, but also from a promoter's perspective, because there's a lot of things that especially local regional guys are doing that they're missing a lot of, not only private centers, but they're not putting on quality events to get press involved. They're not putting on quality events to where sanctioning bodies are happy with their personnel's treatment. So I wanted to put it all together in one easy to follow playbook, if you would.
Very cool, very cool. Now, how long was the process as far as writing each book?
Well, the official fight promoter playbook took 2.5 years. There was a lot of contracts. There were a lot of checklists, forms, getting in contact with different governing councils, finding out different medical procedures, things of that nature. So that one took the longest. As far as the other 4 books, that was probably about a 6-month process that had a lot more to do with strategies, marketing, branding, basically overall arc of growth, depending on where you wanted to be on the food chain as far as a fight promoter.
And how did you get involved in combat sports? I understand that you started getting into boxing at a very early age.
I did. I'm from Ohio, and so boxing and football are basically the 2 primary sports. At least they were when I was growing up. So my grandfather was a boxer. He was still doing road work at 80 years old. My father boxed. My uncles boxed. It was sort of a family tradition. I was actually talking to C.J. Ross, who's a Nevada boxing judge, about that, and we were discussing how boxing just is kind of in everybody's blood in Ohio. So I started at 8 years old in Dayton, kind of moved up through the ranks, was actually a sparring partner and good friend to a 2-time National Gold Gloves champion. And then, Dayton got a little too small, so I had to start branching out and, worked out of Crunk's Gym for a while in Detroit, Gleason's in Brooklyn, then Wild Card in Los Angeles, and just kept trying to find that elusive pot of gold under the rainbow, if you would.
And with boxing and mixed martial arts right now, particularly mixed martial arts, I mean, you still see on pay-per-view they make quite a bit of money with the right fights if promoted correctly. But I feel like there's also so many fights out there these days. Now, I would imagine somebody could read your book and learn a lot, and if they apply it correctly, can be very successful. But do you think that mixed martial arts in particular, and even boxing to an extent, need to pull back as far as the number of events based on oversaturation, lower ratings, and lower live gates?
I wouldn't say they need to pull back. I think that as far as MMA goes, UFC has done a brilliant job as branding UFC as MMA. And so when you think of MMA fights, you automatically tune into UFC. In regard to the UFC, their deal where they moved from Spike to Fox Sports 1, I think hurt them a lot because you had a certain clientele that, knew when you wanted to watch MMA, you would tune into Spike. You got to see the Ultimate Fighter reality series. You got to, there wasn't any thinking involved. You knew exactly where it was. Now with their move to Fox Sports 1, if you're not really paying attention to, the changing environment, you're not going to be able to see it. As far as on the lower end, though, as local and regional fights, I don't think they need to pull back. I mean, there's tons of fighters in gyms all around the country who need fights. But working with local press, regional press, building a brand name, getting the community involved, building a good mailing list, building a text list of people, letting people know when fights are happening in the community, getting some fighters who have good reputation, but not just using those fighters to sell tickets to their friends and their current fan base, but adding your own community fan base to it, whether it's local, city, regional. I think that there just needs to be more effort put behind press, marketing, and branding than just getting some fighters who have a local fan base and then having them sell tickets for you.
And do you think, in regards with the UFC, they do a great job as far as their shows go, but the one complaint a lot of people have is that a lot of them feel like they're the same. Like there's nothing that separates them. For example, if they ran in Mexico City, you wouldn't exactly see shots of downtown Mexico City. There wouldn't be any kind of special entrance. If they're in Canada, the octagon, the set, everything looks exactly the same as it would if they were running in New Jersey. Do you think they kind of got to maybe take even more of a WWE approach and maybe diversify these events a little bit more, make them feel a little bit more significant, at least for the casual fans that maybe don't follow the sport as closely?
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, everything has to evolve. Everything has to have a certain flair to it, a theme, Rumble in the Jungle, Thriller in Manila, the one, every event needs a storyline, Brady versus Manning, if you would, from the NFL. So, yeah, absolutely. There has to be time, effort, thought, and energy put into a promotion. It's not just about two fighters, but it's about the backstories like you were just talking about.
And I'm sure you go over this in your book, but what is the worst mistake you've ever seen a promoter make? Or at least one that just glaringly comes to mind right now?
Treating the press without any respect, not having press passes, not having press seating. When the press shows up, not even having them on the list to get in to talk about the fight. Worst mistake I've ever seen made, but I've seen it done time and time again, where promoters don't court the press, don't invite the press to come talk about the fighters. They just depend strictly on word of mouth, that they're holding the fight at like a local Holiday Inn or something to that effect. I've seen so many promotions die because they didn't respect the press.
Hey, well said. Luckily, I've not run into that myself, but I have heard stories about that as well. And you wouldn't believe it in 2013, 2014. There's still guys that don't understand the benefit of press. I mean, if people write about you and tweet about you, that's going to build up buzz. But hey, well, they can read the official Fight Promoter Playbook on Amazon.com and on Kindle. Before we let you go, Tony, we really do appreciate the time. Where can fans find you online?
They can find me on Twitter, twitter.com/FightTown. They can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/FightTown, and Instagram.com/FightTown. And then they can always email me, Tony@FightTown.net.
Excellent. Tony, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Fred. Really appreciate your time, too.
Yeah.